So I want to say a special thanks to all the folks that helped make tonight possible. The Gender Justice Fund, Impact Collective, Miss Foundation, which we are so excited to have here. Miss Foundation was really the first women's fund, national women's fund in the United States. So thank you. The Third Wave Fund, the Women's Donors Network, Women Moving Millions, Women's Foundation of Colorado, Women's Foundation of Minnesota, Women's Foundation of the South, and Feminist Majority Foundation. Thank you so much. As one of the earliest women's funds in the country, we together have to build an ecosystem that supports grassroots organizers, healers, storytellers, and movement building nationwide. So tonight, we want to make sure the invitation is not just to listen and reflect, but also to act. To buy the book, of course, that's very important. Share it, teach it, discuss it in community, to support your local women's funds, to invest in organizations moving resources to people building a more just future. And also, of course, dismantling patriarchy that requires not only ideas, but sustained investment in movements and community, which is one of our primary goals. So I want to introduce the speakers tonight. I spoke a little bit about Dr. Anna Malaika Tubbs, who is a scholar, an advocate, and a New York Times best-selling author. She's author of Erased, What American Patriarchy Has Hidden Us, which is actually her second book. I want to introduce Aisha Becker-Burrowes, who is a social entrepreneur and impact consultant, co-founder and executive director of FEMINIST, and she leads a global media community of more than 6 million folks centered on racial and gender justice. And of course, we have a discussion moderator by the Queen of Questions, Danielle Robay, who's a journalist, interviewer, creator, and host known for thoughtful, incisive conversations and creator of Question Everything. Otra vez, muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí, and thank you everyone for being here. And here they are.
Thank you so much, Bia. And hello to everybody. It's so much fun to see you in the chat. We all love seeing where you're calling in from, so keep those coming. Before we begin, I just want to encourage you to share your reactions and your thoughts in the discussion chat, because we'll be sending out written answers following the event. And the three of us are going to spend the next 45 minutes talking about a system that I think most of us were taught not to see. And here's what you can expect out of this conversation. I think you'll walk away with a new vocabulary. So you'll have words for things that you've been feeling but couldn't quite name. I think you'll probably hear a few stories that you weren't taught in school, but probably should have been. And also a reframe of some of the headlines that you've been reading lately that I think will change how you scroll through your feed tomorrow. And if we all do our jobs right, Aisha, Anna, and I, then I think you'll leave with one sentence that you're going to want to screenshot and send to someone you love, along with your copy of Erased. This is my ARC. I got the advanced reader copy. I don't have the paper book yet, so I have to purchase it tonight along with you.
I'll show it.
Okay, good. Isn't it so beautiful? So Anna, today marks a year and a day since Erased was published. How has talking about and fighting against patriarchy been over the last year? What have you observed?
Oh, it's been a journey. I also have to say thank you both so much for making time for this. I'm so grateful to be in this space with all of you. Everybody who logged on tonight, thank you so much for being in this conversation. And thank you to all of the partners who made this possible, including the Women's Foundation of California. So all the gratitude. How has fighting patriarchy been this year? It was a wild time for this book to come out, honestly. I've been
Hmm.
writing it obviously for several years, but for it to come out during the re-election of President Donald Trump was really fascinating, to say the least. I think it came out at a time where people really needed it. I didn't plan it
Hmm.
that way, of course, but sadly, it was relevant before and it became even more relevant after.
Hmm.
I've found that this book has brought a lot of people hope and also has brought a lot of people dialogue in a way that they've not experienced with patriarchy before. Because the way I approach it is less of a blaming each other or pointing fingers or, not necessarily thinking that the contemporary men in our lives are the only issue, but more so, how can we all come together
Hmm.
think about the system that was set up in 1776, then we can actually really go back and trace the moments when patriarchy was built, when patriarchy was chosen. Patriarchy is not divine, it's not the natural order. It takes people who choose it, who write it into policy. And so when we can really disarm ourselves for a second and focus on the construction of that system, then we realize that it's not benefited any of us really, that we've
Hmm.
all been left unscathed by it, that we're all hurting as a result of it. And so that's been a really amazing conversation to have at a time where people feel very divided, when people feel very afraid, when a lot of people feel like this is the worst we've ever seen in our nation, or they're saying things like this. We don't know how to resist. We don't know what to do. It feels like we're regressing so much. For me to come in with a book that says, actually, this is not brand new. And that's not to minimize the pain that we're experiencing, but more so to remind ourselves we know how to fight this. We have the tools to fight this. And so I'm really grateful that I had this book out at a time where I think it's been helping a lot of folks. And I would also say, to wrap up this answer, that it's had sort of this continued growth the book has, because when it first came out, honestly, it was being censored a lot. There weren't a lot of publications that wanted to talk about the word patriarchy. I think a lot of people felt afraid of what might happen if they highlighted this book. Putting a book out in 2021 versus 2026 was a completely different experience. And I would say just the power of the word of mouth and people feeling like this book meant something to them in this time was enough for folks to start telling each other about it. And for
Hmm.
it to still have this amazing wave and effect of influence at a time where so few publications were trying to highlight it at the very beginning. So that's also been really powerful to see. People just coming together, telling each other, hey, you might not have read about this book, but I read this book and it mattered and it really helped me understand what we're seeing on a national level. So that's been my experience over the last year, and it's continuing to grow.
I think you bring up a great point about the word patriarchy. Aisha, you run feminist. Both of those terms are so charged. There's backlash to the terms themselves, even among people who used to use them, which is what I find so interesting right now.
Mhm.
How are you talking about the word feminism and the word patriarchy, and why does the fight still matter to you in 2026?
Oof, I love this question. I think I've actually been interrogating like my own relationship to feminism and like what it means as a word. I think for
Mhm.
me, it's both a belief, right? But it's also a practice. And I think that that's the part that a lot of folks kind of, I don't know if forget is the right word, but like ideally, it's like the gender should never determine your rights, your safety, your autonomy or opportunity, right? And that this idea of like liberation has to be real for the people who are most harmed by the system of patriarchy, particularly American patriarchy. And that's Black women, trans women, disabled people, poor people, immigrants, everyone is really more free, right? Like
Mhm.
it's this idea. I think of Fannie Lou Hamer, who says nobody's free until everybody's free, right? But that feminism as a practice is the part that I feel like people forget. It's a commitment, right? Like it's a real commitment to redistributing power and building a world where this is like even possible. And recently I've been kind of co-organizing actually with Raquel Willis and Eliel Cruz on the gender liberation movement. And we've been thinking a lot about this idea of how feminism, to me, is actually a practice of gender liberation. And so we've actually been kind of like building a narrative framework around that. But yeah, I think perhaps like my idea of feminism is really transitioning into this idea of sort of feminism in practice, and that practice is really a practice of gender liberation. But in terms of how we use it, like we use it often. I think it's important to use feminism. It's important to say patriarchy. It's important to also educate people on what it actually means and not just kind of have it be these buzzwords. But to Anna's point, like we are seeing patriarchy at play in ways that we, maybe perhaps haven't seen in a long time. And so I think even when I first picked up her book a year ago, right, like I reread it in advance for this conversation and I was like, oh my God, this is hitting so different right now.
Mm,
Um, so yeah,
Yeah, I completely
An-
agree. I just want to jump in and say the practice
please.
side of it is so
yeah,
important because the way I define it is it's the opposite of patriarchy is what feminism is, and that's why they go so hand in hand, but it's also why they've been used as these trigger words so that we feel like we shouldn't say feminist anymore, or we feel like the word patriarchy, we're tired of it, we're hearing it too much, but then we don't actually fully understand it either. And so the propaganda around both of these words and keeping us from being able to use it as we battle
Mhm.
patriarchy has been really strategic, and even the way I'm always so amazed, the way feminist allows for even a new generation of people, like regardless of gender, to really reclaim the word again and say, yes, like this is so powerful. And look how many people are a part of this community because for so long, saying the word feminist was something that
Yeah.
were distancing themselves
yeah,
from. So I think what Aisha and her co-founder have created is so incredible. It's so amazing.
thank
I love
you.
that you said that feminism is the opposite of patriarchy. It made me realize that I think some of these words have been politicized, and that's why they're so charged. Like even patriotism feels politicized nowadays. I remember interviewing a woman years ago who wrote a book. Her name was Anne Marie Tendler, and she had checked herself into a facility, like quasi rehab, after a really tough breakup. And her book started so plainly. She said, "We live in a patriarchy, and I feel it all of the time." And her whole book was like how the patriarchy sent her to rehab, basically, which was really interesting. How do you both feel it on a day to day basis? Like taking all of the terminology away, how does it affect your lives daily?
It's interesting because I know you said to take away the terminology, but I almost
Yeah.
have to start with the terminology in order to explain.
Jump back in, jump back in.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to follow the rules, but
I love
I
it.
feel like we have to define what patriarchy is, but also
Okay.
why I very specifically talk about American patriarchy in order to understand how it impacts every single part of our lives, right? And so I'll say first and foremost, when I say American patriarchy, I'm not saying that it is the only patriarchy in the world by any means. I'm not saying that it's better or worse. I'm not in the business of ranking patriarchies. They're all bad. We don't want them, period. But I do think that they operate differently in each of the places where you find it. So if you have patriarchy in the US, that's going to be a little different than a patriarchy in India. That's going to be a little different than a patriarchy in Ghana, for example. And all of that depends on those people who chose to create the patriarchy in that place. So just bear with me because then the rest of the conversation will make so much more sense in my approach to patriarchy. In the US, we look at our founding fathers in order to understand the patriarchy that they chose. So when they won the Revolutionary War, they were very afraid that other people were going to be fighting for their freedoms too, right? They were the underdogs. No one expected them to win. And so all of these rebellions are spreading across this new nation. They are afraid that women are asking to be treated better in this new nation. They are very afraid that people who are enslaved are fighting for their freedom, not asking, demanding their freedom. They're very afraid that indigenous people are continuing to fight. They're afraid that poor people are asking to be treated more fairly. So many rebellions, but Shays Rebellion in particular is the reason they decide that they need to write a constitution and decide who gets to be human in the United States, who's going to be the people in charge, who's going to have power here. And they define that by saying it's going to be them. Men like them are going to get to vote. Men like them get to own land. Men like them get to speak for themselves and represent themselves. They tell the women in their lives, all that you can do is reproduce our power through children. Otherwise, we don't want to hear your opinions. We don't want you to participate politically. And this is not Anna's controversial opinion. It's fact. It's written. It's traceable. They did not want women included. And they erase indigenous practices that acknowledge people beyond a gender binary. So they decide in the United States, this new nation, there is man, and all that woman can do is reproduce the power and the status of man. And that is our binary, and that is our limited definition of who gets to be human. But we also know in the Constitution that they protect the institution of slavery. So that means they are not including Black people in their definition of man and woman. We know that they're excluding Indigenous people. They say they're a part of some other nation. They don't have protections here. So they're not including them in their binary either. They're not including immigrants from that point forward. And then they decide that the states can decide if people who don't own land are going to get any right to vote. So that's how they exclude poor people. And so everybody else who is excluded is told, but if you assimilate enough to these two groups that are recognized, this man, woman, binary, then maybe someday you will know what it is to be treated as a human being in the United States. And so it tricks everybody who isn't actually included in the original social order to still protect it, to still do their part to maintain it, to still try to ascend this made up ladder. And the people who have been pushed the most and the furthest away from it are Black women. And Black women told, actually, in your case, your status is what you pass on to your child. So no matter how Black women came to have children throughout American history, and especially when we're looking at times of slavery, it was that they were still going to be treated as slaves. And so many different examples to point to this, but Black women then are cast so far away from this system that Black women have often been seen as the foil to American patriarchy, because we are aware if the law says that we aren't human or that our children are not human, Black women have never said, oh, well, if the law says it, it must be true. Instead, it's been Black women saying that is made up, and I need to make up something different, and I need to help this nation to reflect my vision of what's possible, where all of us are treated as human beings. And so I say all of that history because that's what we come up against still to this day. American history can all be summarized as a tug of war between these two stories. One group that says we want to keep this social order, this original social order, and another group that says this is not good enough. And so in all of our policies and all of the systems that came out of the Constitution, it's the reproduction of American patriarchy. And so if we haven't confronted that definition, then of course we're continuing to face it on a day-to-day basis, and in a lot of my work, it's around maternal health. This is the reason why Black women still are not taken seriously when they go into delivery rooms, and really any example of biases in the United States and groups in conflict with each other, it all comes back to this original social order. And so for me, it's very difficult to separate any of my experiences from that history.
Yeah.
In fact, hopefully now all of you are seeing it. That's where we all have been affected by this made up hierarchy.
Wow. I just learned so much, Anna. Aisha, I'm
Yeah.
curious how you came to the work that you do. How did how did feminist begin?
Yeah. I think for me, I joke that I was like literally born to do this work.
Probably were.
Yeah, thank you. I came to this work because I always really believed in the power of media to shift public consciousness, right? Like I worked in every facet of the media industry. I was in music, I was at Netflix, Viacom, CBS, Essence. So like specifically doing social impact work, which I think is important. But like imagine big tech, streaming, traditional media, publishing. And I saw the power of social media to like really drive action, right? I grew up in a house with a kind of, not a kind of, with a very Black liberatory politic. I was raised by a Rasta, by two musicians and educators who really used like media as a means to make up for the gaps in my education as a young Black girl, in schools where I'm learning a patriarchal history, right? That's not an accurate history. First time I fully understood Sacagawea's story was just now in reading Anna's book, right? Like
Mhm.
that was the history that I was given. But my parents countered that, like I learned about slavery, for example, through them breaking down Bob Marley's like redemption song, which is about the transatlantic slave trade, or, about the South African apartheid through apartheid music. And so I thought I wanted to be a journalist or a documentary filmmaker. But it wasn't that I just wanted to like tell stories. I was like really wanted to move people.
Mhm.
And then working in media, as you can imagine, I saw the reach. I saw how quickly a story can like really reshape what millions of people even think is possible. But
Mhm.
I also felt the gap sort of between cultural impact and like material change and
Mhm.
people being moved and then nothing moving. And so, I also got my master's in media culture and communications from NYU. So I'm also like a nerd and kind of like media scholar in this. But it wasn't because I was just interested in like media as entertainment, right? Like I was really interested in media as an organizing tool and media as a movement infrastructure. And so, I had been building feminist while, in corporate jobs, but it was really when Roe fell, actually, that I had decided to take the leap and quit my six-figure job to make a salary of zero and do feminist full time to really help us scale, like not as a brand, but like ultimately as an intervention, because stories are still like the fastest ways to make people understand what's happening right now
Mhm.
and drive people to take action and like really use it as a tool for digital advocacy. And so within a few months, we became a nonprofit, and it has catapulted us so much further. And I, have been in rooms that I would have never dreamt of and imagined, and did a lot of work with Kamala Harris's team and Obama, and doing a lot of like repro activism and advocacy through this work. And so it does feel kind of full circle for me. But I think one thing also in Anna's book, where she talked a lot about like the power of story and the
Mhm.
power of like how patriarchy really relies on story. And in a lot of ways, I believe that feminist is sort of like not the only antidote, because that's a big, big statement to say that the antidote to patriarchy is the platform I built. But like it is a antidote, right? Is sort of a platform built by women, about women, advocating for gender expansive people, and really challenging this narrative of patriarchy.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, when I was speaking earlier about the censorship that this book,
Yeah.
Aisha was one of the first to say, I'm highlighting the book, I'm interviewing Anna, and
Mhm.
feminist media became, the way that the word was getting spread. And so
Mhm.
we face this kind of censorship all the time. We face the propaganda of patriarchy
Yeah.
constantly, right? Because something that is made up, and I'm going to say it so many times because patriarchy is made up. We all have to remember it's made up. We can make up something new, but it's really fragile, right? And so, in order to make it seem stronger than it is and make it seem
Mhm.
more real than it has to erase evidence of anything else. So that's why a
Mhm.
platform like Feminist that has 6 million plus followers is standing in the face of that every single day saying, well, you're going to try to silence us, but we're coming with our own tools too, and within our own, I don't want to say army because I'm like not really, I'm a pacifist. So like, but like we're coming with our own peaceful army of we're going to make these changes and we're going to talk about the stories that others are trying to hide and trying to keep from us knowing how to resist. So it's incredibly powerful, and it does within a second make a difference when you're able to highlight someone's
Mhm.
story.
An army of education.
Yeah.
You both just mentioned the power of story. And I don't know if everybody can see here, but if you look at the contents page of Anna's book, if you read the chapter names in order, it forms a complete sentence, or dare I say argument. I've never seen an author do that. What does it say in full, and how did you think about that? Why'd you do that?
I feel like I should read it. Should I read it?
Please.
It actually is a poem. And the way I wrote it is the titles of the parts are what is being hidden from us by American patriarchy. And then in between, it's how it's being hidden from us. But the final part of each, or the final chapter of each part is always hopeful, because I am full of optimism, full of hope, and our ability to create something new. So I'll just read
Mm-hmm.
it really quickly.
Okay.
Let us begin again. Our shared humanity and ancient wisdom. We have been misled, our stories contorted and buried. Theirs were elevated and romanticized to justify dehumanization and stop us from, and this is the positive part, the thing that we have to do, writing another story. Our intuition and self-determination. Through vicious reminders and heinous violence, we have been subjected to their rules and their hatred of our continued resistance.
Mm.
Our capabilities and strength. They have taken our potential, turned it into weakness, so we cannot win. Told to never question them and always doubt what we know to be true for ourselves. Our creativity and joy. With deafening volume and repetition, critique and silencing, they exclude, divide, and limit us. They put us in danger. They do not spare our children. Our sense of safety and community. None of us are protected from its growing reach, nor its seeds of division, nor its desire to sever our vision of new possibilities. And part 6 is entirely positive and entirely all the things that we are reclaiming, our interconnectedness and our courage. Regardless, I believe we can win together, recognize one another, create justice, and recover all that has been hidden, not least of all, our power.
That
Wow.
is so cool. That went over my head, actually. Like I did not even realize that as I was reading.
I
That's
know it's kind of a
amazing.
hidden thing. I was curious
Yeah.
how many people would notice and how long it would take people to notice that I was, telling the story with the titles. So thanks for noticing, Danielle.
Oh my God, I got chills, and I actually felt emotional hearing you read it. I know the book is about patriarchy as a system, but I was listening to you read it thinking like, this is what it feels like to be Black in America. It is just, it was kind of chilling watching you read it. I opened the book and I figured it would be full of data, or you would start with like our founding fathers, maybe. And instead, it opens with you on a picnic blanket in LA, sipping a nice latte, and you're 6 days past your due date, and you're watching your son, who had already been born, on the slide. Why start the book that way?
It's I want, there's a lot of reasons. First, the three mothers. If anyone has read The Three Mothers, anyone who's listening, I start the first story by talking about the day that I found out I was pregnant with my firstborn. And so I wanted to give my daughter an ode as well in this one. And I have a book coming next year where I will start with my third baby as well. So that's one thing. But two, because it really is an invitation into seeing the world through my eyes and walking through how I came to understand American patriarchy. And so it's similar with the three mothers. I always share personal stories too. And
Mm.
I'm always asking readers to be vulnerable with me as well. Let's go on this journey together. Let's walk through this together. Although I am also a proud nerd, just like Aisha, I love research. I have always found academia to be very boring. I'm sorry to any academics out there, but we have often been trained in academia to do this performative jargon where we're using all these words that mean nothing, honestly.
Mhm.
And for me, I'm a Black feminist. I'm carrying the tradition of Black feminists before me. The work that we write is for our healing, for our thriving, for our survival, for our understanding each other better, for keeping our stories alive, for opening doors. And it's not about exclusivity. It's not about the performance of, trying to pretend that we're having to prove something. That's not it. It's entirely for the love of our people and
Mhm.
helping other people understand that we are, the antidote to all of these social ills and how we deserve to be seen in all of our humanity. And so that's why my books feel, one, very personal. Two, I'm often told that they read like novels, even though it's
They
nonfiction.
do.
Thank you, which is such a huge compliment. Thank you. And that's exactly what I intend. So, and then I start with, that part of the poem is "Let us begin again."
Mhm.
And so I use the words of June Jordan, where she says that each time a child is born, the world begins again.
Mm.
And this belief that we're co-creating new worlds with our children, right? We don't have to just fall into the same patterns from before, but instead, our children give us these beautiful opportunities to just usher in new worlds. And we're not supposed to tell them, you need to fit this or do this, but instead, as parents, we're really just supposed to protect the new world that they're bringing and allow them to bring it. And so I end that introduction. I start off by saying that I was 6 days past my due date, and I was just waiting patiently. And my midwife saying that a due date is just an estimate. She's coming right on time, and you just have to be patient. And really just imagining who this child was, because we never find out the sex, and it's always a surprise. And then at the very end, I talk about her being born and how I could tell she was already bringing in this new world and on her own
Mm.
time, right? Like no one was going to tell her anything. Like this was her time.
Yes.
And then I just invite us all to begin again with her.
Hmm.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Aisha, in the book, Anna speaks about what's missing in books and archives. And I want to know from your perspective as a media expert, how does the erasure play out in social media? And how do you use feminist to reclaim what's being hidden?
Yeah, this is a great question because there's kind of so many ways to answer it.
Mm.
Um, you know, I actually think this question like also keeps me up at night.
Fair.
Like it
Yes.
is, I was talking about how I'm jet lagged and I have this cortisol spike that's like waking me up at 3 a.m. and I'm like, and it's this question.
Mm.
Um, but it also informs like a very intentional strategy because I think the first part of the question, which is like, how does it look on social media, is it looks like algorithmic censorship, which Anna hit on a little bit, which ends up being disappearance, right?
Mhm.
Information not being able to reach people, especially when you talk about things like abortion. It looks
Mhm.
like the algorithm quite literally favoring white women with a particular aesthetic to be the messengers. It looks like credibility laundering, ideas sort of pioneered by like marginalized folks getting repeated by mainstream voices that are then kind of like stripped of their origin and kind of treated as like new thought, right? That's
Mhm.
intellectual, that's stolen intellectual labor. That happens a lot. But it also looks like sort of censorship around talking about abortion, which I mentioned, or Black maternal health. And there's one book that I actually want to bring up. Again, in grad school, I read it, but it was Sophia Noble's book called Algorithms of Oppression, which is a really fabulous book that really like examines how search engines at the time, because I think it was like 2016, 2018, like Google, are profit-driven systems that really essentially like reinforce
Wow.
racism and sexism. And I think that that has absolutely multiplied now that we're seeing AI. Um, Now that we're also seeing like Meta getting a lot faster with their algorithm, the ways in which we're seeing, our politicians and the administration kind of weaseling their way into our algorithms and, the ways in which we, for example, like close to the election, noticed that our reach was dropping. We reached 25 million a month, and that number dropped rapidly. Whenever we talk about abortion or there's some new case that's happening, right? Like the reach just drops significantly. And so this informs the strategy, which I mentioned, right? So it's like, yes, terrible, horrible things are happening. The patriarchy has at play with our algorithms and all the things. But
Hmm.
also, I think we've intentionally built feminist as sort of like I don't know if it's like a political reclamation, but like we've built the strategy around this, right? It's
Hmm.
like, we see our Instagram, it is Meta, it's where our largest audience is. It grew from 1 million to 6 million in 2020, and we're like, well, we're here now.
Hmm.
But we created a newsletter, a website, like that's why we call it social first, is that really it becomes this funnel for much longer form conversations, but also in person. We do a
Hmm.
lot of in-person events, building that community of finding ways to build power collectively. And so, I think also there's something to be said about the fact that our success really has been that we've built an audience so large that like effectively reach people no matter how strong the censorship tries, you know? Um, and I also think it's funny that you say archive because we might be acquiring one, but you didn't hear that from me. I don't
Ooh,
know.
that's cool. Okay,
So,
we won't tell. All
yeah,
113 of us will not tell.
maybe sort of. I don't know. We'll see.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
Um,
Um,
Anna,
yeah.
I'm curious about like personally curious about something in the book. You connect three women. You connect Anita Hill, Christine Blasey Ford, and Chanel Miller. Three women, three different decades, the 80s, the 90s, and the mid 2000s. What do they teach us together that we don't learn from them alone?
Hmm. Yeah, three incredible women. I'm talking one about how things have changed throughout those decades and sort of this ripple effect, right? Of Anita Hill, even though the assault that happens to Dr. Ford is earlier than Anita Hill, but her speaking up about it happens first. So Anita really opening this
Mhm.
door for other people, even though she faced such backlash as a result of doing so and is being blamed and harassed years later for coming
Mhm.
forward with her truth, which, many people did not believe her. And we're seeing, of course, how Clarence Thomas continues to mess up a whole bunch of things and be corrupt and all, and et cetera. But at the time, she has to testify in front of a group of all men,
Mhm.
and they are being degrading. They're kind of mocking her. They're kind of acting like these are just normal things for men to do. And how this happens in 1991. And then the year later is called the Year of the Woman because then there's all these women who run for office in record numbers. And so, although it feels at the time for Anita Hill like, wow, did I make the wrong choice maybe by coming out? Is this going to even make a difference, right, in this large issue that we have around sexual assault? Then the follow-up shows how powerful her bravery is because we see then these ripple effects that then lead to, years later, another woman being able to come forward and saying, I'm going to testify as well. Even though I will also still face some backlash, it's us chipping away at the issue and them coming together. And then the
Yeah.
way that then this powerful woman highlights another powerful woman in highlighting her in Time magazine and saying this young woman is carrying our fight forward, and how all three of them basically show you will not stop us. You will not silence us, no matter how much you try to punish us. And the reason I say punishment is because that part of the book, I'm starting to explain how something that is made up presents itself as the only option available to us. So, how
Mhm.
patriarchy is manufactured, but then in order for it to seem like the only thing we can choose, we are punished if we do not adhere to it. We are punished even just as a reminder of the place we're supposed to be in. And
Hmm.
so I really read moments and horrific tragedies like sexual assault as a form of that punishment, basically trying to tell women you have no power and we are going to remove any agency and we get to decide what's going to happen to you on various levels, right? In sexual assault and sexual harassment, and the way legislation then protects the perpetrator of violence and doesn't protect the survivor, the way in which the media sensationalizes things that questions the survivor over and over again, but that you're still seeing alongside these attacks, women carrying this legacy forward of saying, we see each other, we're going to make these changes together, we're going to speak
Hmm.
up against this, and we're going to be in positions of power where we get
Hmm.
to adjust this system. And so Anita's Hill story in the book I say is in 1991, but then I was born in 1992, the year of the woman, and so was Chanel Miller. And so I also am connecting all of our stories. And it gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about the structure of the book because when I sat down to write this book, after I had told my publisher I'm going to write the go-to book on American patriarchy, and she was like, "Yeah, we love it. Go forward and do it. It's going to be awesome." And then I sat down and I was immediately overwhelmed because it's in everything that we do. And as I thought, how am I going to tell? What stories am I going to use? Like, how do I pull these stories?
Right.
And I realized, okay, I think actually each story will lead me to the next story. And I just have to
Hmm.
trust that the stories that are meant to be in this are going to be in this together. And so that's sort of how I wrote it. And I finished Anita's Hills, and then I talk about 1992, another woman born in 92. I talk about Chanel, and then I talk about Christine Blasey Ford. So they all just come together. And that's how the whole book was written.
Mm. You know, I hope this is okay to ask you, but the strongest critique that I've heard of your book goes something like this. And it's not of your actual book, it's just sort of the idea, which is the diagnosis is so totally paralyzing. Where's the leverage? What do you say to somebody who feels just so frozen or like helpless in this huge system that's in place?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I will say with my books, it always ends with, here's what we do now. Like I'm never coming at you just to be like, hey, we all really have to wallow in this, and this is really as it is, and it's heavy. But the
Yeah.
biggest thing that I'm often asked is, how are you still so happy? How do you have so much energy when you write about these things and you're aware of how horrific it is? And it really always does come back to this belief and understanding of it is so fragile. Patriarchy is so fragile. It is
Hmm.
so vulnerable. And so these attacks actually can be read as fear of our power, deep, deep fear. And that gives me a lot of hope, actually. That gives me a lot of inspiration. It's like, oh, okay, well, let's be powerful then. Like let's do the thing and let's carry forward those legacies of
Hmm.
those who came before us and also understood how made up this was. I really think that's why Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks and so many others were able to just speak very honestly because they were just like, well, this is what it's just made up. Like let's just move forward.
Yeah.
And so I always end my books with, here's your roadmap for what you do next. And here's how you start to live differently immediately. You don't have to wait for national change to happen for you to create the antithesis of patriarchy. And in fact,
Hmm.
people have been doing this all along. It's not that we've all just been sitting here, waiting for those who loved the original social order to suddenly wake up and say, today's the day I'm going to give people their rights. I just really feel like I'm going to adjust this system. It's been that people who were not served by the system, who knew that it was hurting all of us, every single day we're creating something else. And so we can do that too. And it's never been the case throughout any world history that progress has happened first on a national level. It's always been the case that the changes were happening in homes, the changes were happening in neighborhoods, in communities,
Hmm.
and that ripple effect was spreading of that feels better to us. that includes us. That allows me to be treated with dignity and respect. And then you see it scale where the people demand that same model that they have and that what they've built in their community. Then we force it to happen on a national level. And so that's what we have to participate in every single day. The only thing we cannot do is decide that one change is impossible. That's not going to get us anywhere.
Hmm.
And had that been the case for, like the women that I study in my first book, Alberta King, Berta Baldwin, Louise Little, if they had just given up, then how would I enjoy the privilege of walking my three Black children into school that with kids of all different backgrounds? Like we really
Yeah.
forget what's
Mhm.
happened over the last 250 years in the United States. And so yeah, my book is never going to be, hopefully, in that vein of critique. Hopefully, people are like, they made it to the end. We diagnosed the issue. I always end with a manifesto, to be honest.
Yeah. Aisha, you mentioned at the beginning of this that you reread the book ahead of our conversation. I'm curious if you uncovered anything about yourself or a practice or an ancestor while you were reading this.
Mm. I I think for me the biggest takeaway was remembering, I think as I'm reflecting on sort of feminist and all that I've built, we've been a nonprofit 2 years now. So when we first had our conversation, we were maybe a year in of that sort of new world for us. And I think, and also been thinking, we've expanded the ways that we reach people and all these things. And I've been able to like better articulate, like, when you're building the plane while you're flying it, like now I'm
Mhm.
able to like actually better articulate like what it is that we've done. And
Yeah.
um, I think a lot about just that idea of how patriarchy really survives on a story and
Mhm.
how powerful feminist storytelling, right? Which to Anna's point, feminism as the opposite of patriarchy. Like, what does feminist storytelling really do? So I think that was the theme for me. But when it came to like an ancestor, for some reason, I remember feeling this the first time too, but William and Ellen Craft.
Mm.
Which is the story that sort of illuminated for me, like not only the role of like racial passing could play, but how playing with her gender, right, could quite literally help secure um, both of their freedom. And I think also because even in this conversation, I think, one of the questions that you had asked earlier was like, how does patriarchy, you said patriarchy happens in the everyday. What was the
Yeah, it
term
affects
you
us every
used?
day.
Yeah. And I was like, gosh, I need to sit with this. As deep as I am in this work, like, and as fully entrenched as I am in this work, I don't actually pause long enough to be like, how is patriarchy impacting me today? You know, and I sat with that, and there's like, it impacts me all the time. But you kind of have to pause long enough, to
Mhm.
recognize that. So I think those were the three kind of pieces of it that I've been sitting with since. Yeah.
Mm. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anna, I can imagine you must have uncovered a lot about yourself writing this. Is there anything that specifically sticks out to you?
Ooh, I think it just gave me more of the language, honestly, that
Mm.
I needed. And the way I write books is I have this curiosity about something and I really want to dive deeper into it. And I never know what I'm going to emerge with. My undergraduate training is in anthropology, and I only say that because we're taught to just ask a question without any real hypothesis. You just want to go and observe the question. There's a lot of problematic history in anthropology. I know that, don't get me wrong. But this part of it, I really love. You don't go in with any assumptions. You just dive in with a question. And for me, it really was, so what is American patriarchy?
Mm.
What is it, And it really stemmed from my first book, The Three Mothers, and how these women were erased and nobody knew their stories, and people asking me, why were they erased? How did this happen? And I could
Mhm.
always answer, well, patriarchy. but I really wanted to dive into how is it happening here in the United States? How are we still
Hmm.
seeing it in our policy? How do we trace all the lines? And that was really powerful for me to then emerge from that. I see the world honestly even more differently than I already did before. I've always been very progressive. I was raised by a feminist. I was raised by my Ghanaian father who speaks so much about history and women's role in Ghana is actually really quite elevated and important, especially in our tribes. And so I've just always had such a feminist background, but it then pushed me to really think about, okay, so patriarchy, since we know it wasn't the beginning, how do
Hmm.
we reclaim our indigenous practices, really, and specifically around religion? I now, like, I cannot even, when someone says Father God, I have a really hard time. I'm like, can't we just say God? Like, can't we just say parent God? And it's something that even though I was a feminist before, it didn't bother me that much. But now that I've really dissected the manufacturing of it all and like
Hmm.
every single level, like why would somebody feel like they can't practice their religion if they don't call God he or father? You know, like that really rattles people if you're like, well, God isn't a man. And then they're like, oh, how dare you say that? So for me personally, that's been one of the biggest things, thinking of how I reclaim like what everything was supposed to be
Yeah.
before patriarchy. And I'm on a journey for that.
It's a lot of internal work
Yeah.
because not all of the language is out there, but I think that's what's so special about your book is that it gives us a new vocabulary in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Um, I want to read the line at the end of your book. It says, "I will conclude by saying that I believe it is a world where we each remember our inherent power is indelible and permanently imprinted, a world where it is never hidden nor denied ever again." So, if you could both do me the favor of finishing this sentence for me. The thing American patriarchy is most afraid of is.
You got it. You go first.
I'm a Libra, so I have multiple answers to this question. I would say the thing American patriarchy is most afraid of is a dismantling of the power it holds.
Mm,
Mhm.
hmm. Yeah, I feel
And my
that.
other answer
Love it.
is that it is most afraid of our freedom.
Mm,
Wow.
And that's it. I could say more, but I'll leave you with two.
Those are good. Those are good. The thing patriarchy is most afraid of is our power.
mhm.
Yeah. Doesn't want us to know how powerful we are and doesn't want
Yeah.
us to actually use that power. So, yeah, every single time it's just going to be like, you're not powerful. You can't do this. And so,
Mhm.
you know, it's made up. That's actually a compliment. You're like, oh, actually, thank you. Oh, you're coming at me with an attack. It's because I'm powerful. Got it.
Yeah. Well said. Our power, our revolution, our education. Um,
Now, what would you say, Danielle?
the first thing that came to my mind was our education, but I don't know if that fully, it's like 90% there. It's missing something. Education's part of it, but yeah, I agree with you. It's a system to keep us in place.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I see so many people commenting such
I want to
beautiful
hear what everybody
things.
else's answers are actually.
Yeah, they're saying like
Yeah.
women uniting and a strong and capable woman, patriarchy having to be accountable,
Mhm.
Accountability.
inherent knowledge and intuition, women waking up, our wisdom. Yeah, all of this is so true. I also just want to mention that I've been reading your comments and your questions throughout this chat, and there are some really good questions in here. So don't worry, all of those will be answered. They're going to send you written answers. So thank you that they didn't go unnoticed. And if you made it with us this far, I'm so grateful to you. I want to walk you through three things before we end. The first is on a sentence: the power over others is no longer the goal we are told to aspire to. So let's keep that with us. To me, that's the sentence that I'm going to be sending a friend threading because we no longer tweet. But if you have one sentence that stuck with you tonight, share it with a friend and tell them to follow Aisha and Anna. And the third thing is this book, Erased. Anna, will you hold yours up because this is the old cover?
Yes. I mean, you can get either cover, whatever you all want.
That's true. You can get, that's the paperback. Please buy this book and maybe buy two because I think sharing books is a love language. So buy one for yourself and buy one for somebody that you love, somebody who feels wise and empowered, or maybe who needs a little wisdom and empowerment. And donate a copy maybe to your school library or an organization that could benefit from this tool. I know Anna's been doing so much work to get this book into so many different communities and libraries. So, Anna, Aisha, thank you both for the gift of this conversation. I read the book and I still learned something new today. So, thank you both.
Thank you, Danielle. That was
Thank
such
you.
Thank
Appreciate you both.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all. It's so wonderful to be amongst a group of people who are so passionate about the world and the people in it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Take good care.
Bye.
Bye.